If you're creating online content in 2026, you can't just rely on Google Ads. You need to be diversifying your content and diversifying your revenue streams. I think it's as simple as that. I'm Jack Chambers-Ward, and this is SEO in 2026.
Jack, what's your number one SEO tip for 2026?
It is how to create and monetize content to survive the upcoming zero-click era of search.
Zero clicks have been slowly approaching, but are you saying it'll be an all-encompassing zero-click, non-traffic era at some point in the future?
It certainly feels like we're heading that way. A lot of what Google has been talking about recently with AI mode, I think, is kind of the looming topic that we're all talking about at the moment in SEO, right? And obviously, we've seen a massive drop-off in clicks from AI overviews being presented in a lot of SERPs. And I made a prediction, I think it was late last year. No, it had been early this year when they announced AI mode, that by the end of 2026, we would be then ready to kind of embrace AI mode as the main search feature in Google. And Sundar Pichai from Google has talked about how they're kind of trialing a lot of elements in AI mode that then pull through to a lot of traditional search features. I have a feeling they're moving towards a more fully integrated version of search that combines AI mode and some of the more traditional stuff, which to me says a significant drop off in clicks even more as fewer and fewer people are using that traditional search method.
And are you personally fully embracing AI mode?
Oh, fully embracing is a strong word for it. Testing and poking around and having some fun with, sure, but I'm not fully embraced just yet. I think I've found some interesting uses and some interesting results, but I think, and much like with AI overviews and much like with Gemini and Search Live as well, it all does still feel a little bit early for me to be sort of like fully integrating it. But I think a lot of us are having some fun with sort of like query fan out, and a lot of I'm sure plenty of other people here in 2026 are talking about interesting things like that as well. But I'm poking and prodding and testing a little bit for sure.
I think the key thing is differentiating between having fun with something and doing something that practically makes sense from a commercial perspective. How do SEOs determine which is which and whether it's actually something worthwhile for them to be doing?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of us often start off our careers with a lot of experimentation and testing and stuff. And I think that's a really healthy thing to keep doing. But you're right that there does become a point where you kind of have to turn around and realize that you need to be either working on clients or your own sites or whatever and actually making money from this, which is where my tip kind of leads into. But for me, I think you need to be aware of what is happening at least so you can be future planning, having those conversations with your clients or with your team if you're working in-house. I think it's more of the awareness and the testing stages at the moment for me personally. But I think a lot of us are kind of preparing for a, like I said, fully integrated LLM version of search that I think will be coming soon. And I think there is a lot of discussion about how that will affect the shopping results. Of course, that is a completely different topic. I'm sure somebody else will cover in the series. But I think there is a lot of discussion around how that personalization affects search intent and how conversational search affects search intent as well. There has been some data that has backed this up and some data that has contradicted it. The nature of like the higher quality of AI search traffic, the fact that so many people are doing their research in the LLM interface, for want of a better phrase, on the SERPs before actually clicking through, leading to fewer clicks on websites, as I said earlier. And I think for me, that potentially helps customers find better things, and that can affect how we're then strategizing ourselves and thinking about how we can create content and build websites that satisfy those customer needs.
And in terms of the conversations that you're having with clients at the moment, what specific technologies are they most interested in at the moment? Is it ChatGPT? Is it AI mode in Google? Perhaps agentic search or something else?
Mostly, I think ChatGPT kind of has the brand recognition at the moment, and more people, and I've had friends and family notice AI mode and AI overviews over the last year or so, however this has been going on now. And I think that is becoming more and more a thing people are getting aware of because Google is talking about it more. And obviously a lot of people who aren't in SEO aren't following it as closely as you and I and other SEOs. But I think a lot of people think of ChatGPT as one thing and then Google as a separate thing, and not necessarily kind of aware of how they are actually competing in a search sense now. Fewer people, I know a lot of SEOs who absolutely love things like Perplexity and a few other, Anthropic and what they're doing over there with Claude and things like that as well. But I think mostly ChatGPT and AI mode is what we've been having conversations with clients recently. And particularly we've started doing a little sort of like video series of here is what's happening and here is where it's going, to have a bit of like extra client communication that we can kind of prepare them for. If you see a drop off in clicks, if you see this change, don't worry, this is normal, this is why it's happening, kind of comparing the visibility and the success of kind of the metrics you should be using for success in AI search versus what you would use in traditional search as well.
So you say that this might lead to the downfall of publishers and content creators with clicks decreasing, revenue decreasing. What does this mean from a content publishing strategy perspective? Has it changed what we publish? Has it changed where we want it to be published? Has it changed how we want users to interact with that content?
Yeah, I think more the second two parts of those questions. So where we're publishing and how users are interacting with that content, I think is changed a lot. I know quite a lot of people refer back to if we're going to go back a few years, to the September 2023 helpful content update that literally put a lot of publishers out of business. And there was obviously a huge backlash against Google and lots of people complaining about, I'm no longer getting traffic, I can't survive this, all that kind of stuff. And that kind of ties into, I think, what we're going to see on a much wider scale, because, core updates and helpful content updates are a part of that. But if AI mode, and like I said, I believe it will, becomes integrated into the main search feature, that is a massive, astronomical change to the way people interact with search. So for me, we're having these kind of conversations of particularly diversifying content, not just relying on Google as a source of traffic. So thinking about how you can be creating video content and publishing on YouTube, social media, cross-posting across different platforms, and ensuring you're kind of still getting that visibility and that brand recognition across different platforms and not just kind of all eggs in one basket that is Google, if that makes sense. Strategically, I think the types of content we're talking about with clients at the moment, it's still informational. I still think there is value with informational content, but I think the way we're kind of presenting that and the way we're kind of answering questions, the way we're targeting user intent and being aware of that has shifted a little bit from what we were doing a couple of years ago. We talk a lot about the people also ask stuff here. The team here at Canada built the alsoasked.com, being a way to research that. And I think we're still using that kind of data, those kind of customer questions, those kind of user questions. But the way we're approaching, informational content, I think has shifted slightly when it comes to not just expecting people to get a direct answer and click through and then, a bunch of internal links, and they'll happily go on a user journey throughout the rest of your site and then purchase something. I don't think that user journey is as simple as it was a few years ago. Because I said more people are doing research on that AI interface, the LLM, the SERP, for want of a better phrase. So actually that final click needs to be a quite nice converting page where you can actually get something to purchase, to subscribe to sign up to, whatever your lead, whatever your generation is. That kind of needs to be a big focus as well.
You mentioned increase in visibility and brand recognition there as well when you were talking about YouTube and other places to surface content. Are those the new metrics to measure SEO success in 2026?
It feels like it, yeah. I think in 2025, we were talking all about brand, and brand was the big buzzword pretty much of what, especially my experience as a podcast host, having conversations every single week. It was very much everybody is talking about brand. And I think visibility and kind of the value of clicks versus impressions, I think has felt like it's kind of shifted again with fewer clicks, but in theory, possibly having higher value and higher conversion rate. But impressions actually being a bigger part of that and being noticed and referenced, things like brand mentions in LLM search and citations that don't necessarily lead to a click, but are still those classic marketing touch points, right? And I know there's been plenty of numbers and stats thrown out the year. I think it used to be 8 to 9 different touch points before you actually purchase a thing from a brand. The last number I heard, I think it was a good few months ago still, was more like 30 or 40, maybe even 50 touch points. You will see ads on social media, you'll see them on Google Search, you'll see them in ChatGPT, you'll see a bus ad, a billboard, all this kind of stuff. We need to kind of be everywhere and be kind of building that brand awareness, and that comes through online visibility. And for me, I think when it comes to, having these conversations with clients, comparing traffic year on year, all that kind of stuff, it's going to look bad for a lot of clients, to put it bluntly. You're going to have year on year decreases in clicks. But if you're having, there's a phrase my colleague and our SEO director here, Mark Williams-Cook, says is like, there's the same amount of money being spent on the internet. People aren't shopping less on the web. So the money's got to go somewhere, but it feels like it's kind of spread a bit thinner, right? I think more and more people are kind of finding other places to purchase from rather than just kind of focusing on, oh, it's number one ranking on Google, that's the only source I'll go to, kind of thing.
You mentioned the phrase "be everywhere" there, and I'm never sure quite what to make of that, because that was advice maybe 15 years ago or so, and then I think maybe 5 years ago or so it was find the platform that's right for you, find where your audience is, and interact there, and be human, and do an incredible job interacting with the majority of your audiences. But has the advice flipped again? So because there's so many platforms, because there's so many nascent platforms, and because we can publish maybe high quality content, perhaps in a bespoke manner for each platform using AI, it's actually easier to be everywhere again, and more appropriate to be everywhere.
I think it is easier to be everywhere. I think you're absolutely right. There's ways to cross-publish stuff. There's a lot of sort of like social media publishing tools you can use where you can just, I'll post this to 5 different sites and I'll just schedule it all at once and it'll all do it, which perhaps you couldn't do 10 or 15 years ago. But I think you're right. The advice that we kind of shifted towards a few years ago of find your audience, find that kind of connection, be human. I know my tip in SEO in 2025 was about authenticity and being human, right? And I think that still applies. I haven't completely changed my mind in a year. I think it's still very relevant to be in those kind of places. Again, speaking of visibility, something that's grown in a lot of visibility in 2025 was Reddit and forums and even places outside of the open web, things like Slack groups and Discord and all that kind of stuff. There are other places where you can't necessarily measure, we're getting this much traffic, but you can look at your referral traffic. You can see what people are reacting to in a Reddit thread, or what people are reacting to in a industry specific forum or something like that, if you want to be more niche and more specific for your clients, for your site, for your team, whatever it is. And I think it's kind of a bit of both at the moment. I think you're right that it's easier, but you still need to be aware of like where you're publishing. Don't just go crazy and publish on everything, but it's worth going back to what I was saying about AI mode earlier, testing, poking, prodding, experimenting, finding out, turns out we did really well on TikTok, but nobody cares us about Instagram, or the other way around, or Discord users that's really relevant to our audience, but let's not bother about a Slack or a Mighty Networks or whatever it is. There's so many different options when usually most people would just say Reddit and Quora. Like there's hundreds of thousands of forums for any incredibly niche industry. I'm sure any SEOs listening or watching have found they've had that conversation with a client who has like an unbelievably specific B2B product that will be like the valves in the underwater pipes that connect oil rigs or something. It's like, we just make the valves. I'd be like, okay, is there an audience for that? It's like, oh yeah, there's monthly magazines, there's websites, there's podcasts, there's content for everything these days. There's always a place to publish and like you said, join a conversation and be part of a community as well.
And what will the diversification of publishing opportunities mean for monetization strategies like subscriptions, sponsorships, digital products? Because everyone's having to revisit their revenue model, even Google with AI mode.
Yeah.
Where's the advertising coming from there? But what do brands do where they once relied upon driving traffic to their site that the traffic's drying up a bit?
Yeah, I think this is the key for a lot of the publishers, as I was mentioning at the start, was we entirely relied on those kind of display ads. Those, if you're running a news site or a reviews site or whatever it is, you would rely on those display ads, getting that traffic, getting those clicks, and those connections there through Google Ads, like you're saying, or another ads platform. But let's be honest, mostly Google Ads. When it comes to content creation, what I've done with my podcast in the past, using subscription services like Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee, Ko-fi, there's so many other, again, millions of platforms compared to if we were having this conversation 10 years ago, there'd be a handful. Now there's dozens. And there's even industry-specific versions of those things as well. And for me, when it comes to making money from that sort of stuff, you can do it through premium and exclusive content. I think that's a really big driver of a lot of subscriptions for those kind of platforms. I've found that is very true with my film podcast that I do outside of work. When we publish bonus episodes or exclusive, extras and things like that, that is by far the most popular content that we create. And that has by far driven the most revenue for us. And the same can be true for sponsorships and partnerships. Again, this is a tale as old as time with influencers and content creators and podcasters and stuff. For those of you who don't know, I was a podcaster before I was an SEO. So this is kind of where I'm going from in my perspective as well. Having that kind of direct partnership where you don't have necessarily, Google deciding whether or not you get the money. It's actually you having conversations directly with your sponsors, with your partners. You have so much more control over your revenue streams. You're not relying on a middleman to kind of do the work for you. You can actually get in direct contact, build long-term relationships, all that kind of stuff that can lead to long-term growth and long-term revenue. You can work with the same partner for 6 months or a year or 5 years sometimes. I've worked with, podcast sponsors who have bought or worked with us for an entire 6-month package, and the relationship grew and grew and grew. We ended up doing exclusive shows and publishing stuff for them and working with them and all kinds of stuff. That kind of direct interaction, I think, makes such a big difference for building relationships. Coming back around to the human side of things you mentioned earlier, David, I think that helps build those relationships so much more than, can I do a Google ad on your website? I would like to, bid on this keyword, whatever. It's a much more of a human interaction, and you're far more in control of the money that you're making and who you're working with as well, in terms of brand reputation and things like that as well.
Jack, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
If you're creating online content in 2026, you can't just rely on Google Ads. You need to be diversifying your content and diversifying your revenue streams. I think it's as simple as that.
Jack Chambers-Ward is Marketing and Partnerships Manager at Candor. Find out more over at withcandor.co.uk. Jack, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2026.
Thanks so much for having me, David. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2026, the book, over at SEOin2026.com.